I'm Veronica Marshall at the Capitol. This week on Senate Spotlight, thanks to the Senate's newly released budget targets, several Senate committees are grappling with budget reductions. But the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee isn't one of them.
We don't have lots of places that we can cut without directly cutting critical services.
The number one purpose of government is the safety of its citizens.
How the senators on that committee plan to use the funding they were given to improve safety and justice programs across the state. Plus, to shore up a teacher shortage, educators point to pension reform. But can the state's burdened budget support it?
What's your plan to pay for this?
We cannot wait any longer.
Others say we can't afford not to. That's all coming up.
Senate Spotlight is produced by the Minnesota Senate and Senate Media Services.
What does a safe community look like to you? For some, it's about fostering friendly and supportive relationships between people and avoiding violence. To others, safe communities look like spaces with well-developed and maintained infrastructure. However you define it, members of the Senate's Judiciary and Public Safety Committee are tasked with working towards it by assigning resources or enacting new laws. With me now is the committee's ranking minority member, Republican Senator Warren Limmer. Senator, thank you for being here.
Glad to be here.
Now, Senator, as part of this committee, you've been both chair and ranking minority member. So what are the differences you've noticed depending on which caucus is in charge?
Well, each caucus represents a different political party, and as a result, we have different philosophical approaches to just about everything that we decide in government. But in public safety, we recognize, I think both parties recognize, the number one purpose of government is the safety of its citizens. It's a constitutional requirement in the state of Minnesota, as it is in just about every other state as well. However, we do have differences. We have differences of how much money we give to the courts. How do we handle corrections? What are the criminal sentences that we write? Right now, Democrats seem to be leaning more in a less restrictive, less incarceration mode than what we would think in the Republican Party. There's also differences in how we handle law enforcement. We're trying to recognize the causes of crime. They dig a little deeper and recognize people sometimes are a product of their environment. And we would probably recognize that too, but we also need to recognize there has to be a defined sentence to prevent or deter crime in the future. So that's why we would move forward in a more restrictive result and rely on incarceration for violent offenders.
Senator, something both caucuses seem to be converging on this section in the public safety sphere is road or driver safety. And you have several bills out to that effect as well. Senate File 1373, which expands license suspensions for people suspected of criminal vehicular homicide, and Senate File 1374, which increases penalties for certain violations of driving without a valid license. Why do you think this area of public safety is getting so much attention this session?
It's getting more attention because we have more people scoffing the law. We have more people driving erratically, intentionally reckless. The first bill that you mentioned, that would require a police officer, if they suspect and find probable cause that a person committed criminal vehicular murder or operation, meaning you caused the death of someone due to your intentional, reckless driving, a police officer, based on probable cause, could suspend that person's driver license immediately without going to trial. Then when it does go to trial, then the court would decide. This came from a situation that came from my district. A driver was driving 90 miles an hour in a 45-mile zone and caused an accident which resulted in the death of an elderly woman. Looking back at his record, he had numerous traffic violations for high speed just about everywhere he ever drives. And that's the bill that we have. We have another bill that if you're driving with a revoked license, causing an accident, which resulted in severe bodily injury, or a third violation in 10 years with a revoked license, then you would receive an enhanced penalty of gross misdemeanor. But quite honestly, the bottom line is we're recognizing there's a change in driver behavior, and it's not getting safer, it's getting more dangerous, and the legislature needs to respond immediately.
Senator, I hate hearing stories where loss is what drives, new laws, but I love that you guys are able to take that and move forward and protect more families as we go through. You have another bill out, Senate File 292, which asks for additional state trooper appropriations. Talk me through the bill and what those additional funds could be used for.
Well, the bill is actually recognizing the need to recruit new troopers for our highway patrol. Right now, they're about 21 troopers short, and they need the funds. They don't have the funds recognized in the governor's budget. We're trying to convince the governor and the DFL majority that troopers need more funds. We need more troopers on the road to protect our citizens. So it's really about recruiting. Law enforcement also has a problem with retaining police officers across the board, whether it's in the troopers or local police. That's another issue that we're addressing as well. One other one is VSEDs. VSED is Violent Crime Enforcement Team. They're specialized units, they're multi-jurisdictional, and they focus on violent crime, drug trafficking, sex trafficking, some of the more serious crimes that don't stay local, they travel all over the state. And we have 21 teams out there now, but we need more, and the BCA has requested this fund. So we're trying to advance that one as well.
Yeah, I know that Senator Duckworth also has a bill out for law enforcement officer recruitment, and he has a different angle. So I love how it's, you guys are tackling this issue from different sides. Speaking of funding, though, the Senate's budget targets were recently released, and Judiciary and Public Safety Committee actually gained funding over both fiscal years. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's a general recognition that the funds that we govern in our committee are essential to governing. They're recognized by the state constitution. And quite honestly, they are the priority of the state, the safety of its citizens. Democrats have a hard time right now because they increased funding last year by 40% in, not funding, in spending, as well as spending all of the $18 billion surplus last year. They raised taxes by close to $10 billion, and they still don't have enough to handle the new spending obligations that they made for the long term. Many can question whether or not that was a wise decision to spend that money the way they did and have such extravagant spending in the last year. But the commitment is there. It's the law. And now they're having a trouble trying to find where do we get more funding. And it'll trigger, if they have to do it the traditional way, they're going to raise taxes in an election year, and no politician wants to be in that track. So quite honestly, we do have a difference of philosophical opinions on how do we spend money, what is our real priorities. Quite honestly, they've got a problem and they're trying to figure it out. So they bumped the budget for our division a little bit, but it's only a 3% increase. And quite honestly, it's for a 2-year budget, and we're going to be needing more, which means, in my opinion, let's start reducing the spending in other wasteful areas or inefficient areas in state government, and believe me, there are plenty.
Senator, given the funding that you have received for your committee, does it give you confidence that the committee's work and priorities will move forward as imagined, or are there other hurdles still to clear?
Well, the biggest hurdle is going to be the conference committee between the Senate and the House. The House, as you know, has a tied vote. They are not going to be getting too extravagant with their budgets. And yet at the same time, in the Senate, Democrats have a 1-vote majority. It's not a massive amount, but it's enough to advance their protocols and their priorities, which are going to be different than the tied House. So That's going to be a big struggle in the conference committees, and I would imagine it's going to last for weeks in order to figure this out.
But hopefully not a special session.
I think I would settle for a special session, but not a canceled budget in the state of Minnesota. No one wants to have a budget shortfall based on not getting the work done in the legislature.
I think that's something everyone can agree on. Senator, before we get to those conference committees with the House, the Senate has to prepare its omnibus bill. So where is your committee in that process right now?
Right now, we have not seen the formal draft yet. We're expecting that tomorrow in the Judiciary Committee, and we'll be looking at it for the first time. Senator Latz is the chair. His team will be putting their budget together. We'll be in a reactive mode. We have a few provisions in that bill, but there are a number of others that may cause some of my members not to vote for the entire bill.
Okay, Senator, any final thoughts?
This is kind of an atypical legislative session. We usually don't have a budget crisis on our heels. We don't have at the same time a nearly tied legislative session. I'm kind of surprised that the Senate majority is advancing such large reforms that are more liberal in philosophy. I would have thought that they would have recognized that since we're all tied vote, and it's not limited to partisan differences, this reflects the tied sentiments out in our public. And when you have a tied sentiment out in the public, it would be wise for political leaders to recognize that, slow down a little bit, and begin to recognize the base decisions that have to be made and not advance wild-eyed new reforms. This is not a time for that. This is a time to pause, catch our breath, and let the public tell us where we need to go in the next election.
All right, Senator, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
A public safety pilot project approved by the 92nd legislature submitted its results to senators this year. And now some public safety officials say the legislature should expand the program. The Minnesota Department of Public Safety report details the results from its drug detecting technology pilot project, which finds Minnesota is experiencing a multiple substance impaired driving crisis on its roadways. Oral fluid field screening instruments were used to determine the presence of controlled or intoxicating substances in people stopped or arrested for DWI offenses. According to the report, 62% of tests detected more than one drug in a single subject, and 90% of those who tested positive for alcohol also tested positive for one or more drugs. Based on those results, the report's authors ask legislators to approve the use of the screening devices to establish probable cause for arrests in drug-impaired driving cases. DWI reform is an area of special legislative concern for our next guest, Chair of the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee, DFL Senator Ron Latz. Senator, welcome to Senate Spotlight.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Senator, as chair of the Public Safety and Judiciary Committee, you hear from law enforcement agencies all the time. What are they telling you about impaired driving in Minnesota, and how big of an issue is it?
Well, it's an issue anytime there's anyone driving drunk on our roads. The arrests have actually been going down in absolute numbers and in comparison to the overall population in the last several decades. So the state is making great progress toward reducing the incidence of DWI on our roads. That said, it's still out there. And the single biggest determinant to the number of DWI arrests besides the occurrences is enforcement. It's having sufficient officers on the roads to recognize the signs of an impaired driver and to initiate the arrest.
Senator, I know this is an issue that's close to you because earlier this year, people were hurt, some died, and your community as a whole was impacted when an impaired driver drove into a restaurant's patio. And since then, you've created a DWI reform package, more or less. So talk me through that process, what it was like for you, from working through the crash's aftermath to the legislation and where it stands now.
Sure. Well, the crash occurred in a place I used to hang out at a lot, the Park Tavern in St. Louis Park. I lived across the street from there for about 10 years. Great pizza, by the way. And there were people out enjoying the pizza, the drinks, the beautiful summer afternoon when a drunk driver drove through the patio, killed 2 of our valued community members, one of them a waitstaff, a second-generation waitstaff at Park Tavern, and one of them employee over at Methodist Hospital in St. Louis Park, and injured 9 others. And it turned out that this person had about 4 times the legal limit, actually. It's a .32, and had a long history over about 30 years of repeat DWIs. So a person who had met all the requirements for reinstatement of valid driving privileges, had gone through 6 years of rehabilitation and documented abstention, but at some point fell off the wagon. And this is what happened. So the question came up, what can you do about it, right? I've been working in this space since I prosecuted driver's license revocations at the Attorney General's office arising out of DWIs, and that was 35 years ago. And there is no magic bullet. There's no single answer. But one of the most significant responses that we've implemented is the use of the ignition interlock device. And that's where I turn to as a way to try to be more preventive, to get more people on interlock, especially when they've got long track records, like this person did. So that was my first response, was let's find a way to require someone under his circumstances to have to have been on interlock. If he had been, presumably, he wouldn't have been able to start the car.
That's right. Keep those people from kind of going through the system, finding a way to stop them. That's great. Thank you, Senator. What kind of reception has this work you've been doing received from your colleagues here in the Senate or from your wider community?
Well, pretty positive. We haven't received much pushback. A little bit of hesitation with regard to some of the lower level offenders and requiring them to go through the interlock program when they get into a repeat offense situation, and for how long. It's an expensive program, so there's been some hesitation there. But by and large, people are looking to find solutions here. And we've come up with 2 or 3 key focuses. One is to extend the duration of the interlock when it's required, and that ramps up depending on the number of priors that they have in our proposal. To extend the look-back period for requiring the interlock. In other words, when was the prior that triggers the requirement to install and use only a vehicle with interlock. And we went in this proposal from 10 years to 20 years. And then the third main component is to reduce the cost of getting the license reinstated with the interlock. And there's a very substantial reinstatement fee at the Department of Public Safety. Now totals almost $700. We have a proposal that would spread that out, not require all of it paid up front, which becomes a real financial barrier to people who want to be on interlock but don't have the resources to meet that hurdle right away.
Senator, do you think this reform package goes far enough, or is it just a really good starting place to build upon?
I think, well, first of all, we want to see how it works before we do anything more. Over the years, we've done a lot of DWI reforms in Minnesota. Used to be it was a 0.12 alcohol concentration threshold, then we dropped it to 0.10, then to 0.08. We've had longer license revocation periods. We've added forfeitures to repeat offenders. We added a gross misdemeanor for double the legal limit, which is now 0.16. So, and then we added the interlock initially. And the studies across the country have shown, and I carried the pilot project for the interlock program in Minnesota, the studies have shown that it's a very effective way to prevent repeat DWIs. When people are on it, they're required to drive only that vehicle. When the penalty is substantial for driving a different vehicle or for tampering with the interlock device itself, they can't start the vehicle. It's got a rolling retest, so while you're driving, you still have to stay sober. You can't just start it and then have an open bottle and start drinking. You've got to use the device at least daily in order to maintain the requirements of the program. So it helps maintain sobriety in and out of the vehicle. It's even got a camera on the device to make sure the person who's supposed to be on it is the one who's using it.
Yeah, that sounds very thorough and very wraparound. Senator, another bill you have out, which is Senate File 1719, looks to reform another part of our public safety system. It would create a task force on mandatory minimum sentences. Why do you think that a task force like that is necessary?
Well, we haven't had a really comprehensive look at mandatory minimum sentences in Minnesota that I'm aware of at all. And mandatory minimum sentences are one-size-fit-all sentences that judges are supposed to follow. And I say that because some mandatories actually have off-ramps if certain criteria are met, and other mandatories have no off-ramps. They're hard and fast mandatories. But they don't always work in terms of justice in any particular case. They also have substantial costs involved as well in terms of prison costs, workhouse time, people away from families. So it's worth taking a good look at it to see if it really works. It's also a system in the statute that bypasses the sentencing guidelines, which itself has a range of default sentences when you get into certain categories of serious offenses and criminal history, and then mitigating and aggravating factors that can get you out of that. That system is supposed to set up some consistency across the state. Mandatory minimums cuts through that and can leave judges and prosecutors and defendants with little wiggle room to really meet the circumstances of the case. So we want to take a look at that, set up a task force that's a broad-based task force. Give us some feedback so we can have some evidence, make some better informed decisions about the long-term future.
Senator, with the budget targets that have come out, your committee is being fully funded. In fact, getting some unexpected bonuses, shall we say. So it seems like a lot of your priorities will be able to come through. So what else would you like to see happen in the judiciary and public safety sphere?
I wouldn't characterize it as unexpected bonuses. Our budget is about 95% people. They're the correctional officers in the state prisons. They're the crime lab personnel and the scientists at the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. We don't have lots of places that we can cut without directly cutting critical services for the safety of the public, for the safety of our correctional officers. So we don't have much to even meet sort of the requested operational increases for our agencies. But we didn't get a cash cut in that sense. But that also means we don't have enough in our budget, right now anyway, to fund crime victim services the way we'd like to fund some of the crime prevention initiatives that are so important to get ahead of the curve and prevent crime. And there are other initiatives like emergency radios under the Armor system that right now we don't have the funds in the budget. And some of those radios allow jurisdictions and allow agencies like firefighters and EMTs and police to all be able to talk to each other across agencies when they're all responding to an emergency. Those radios right now are getting obsolete. They're end of life. They need to be replaced. So we're trying to find a way right now to fix that problem, but we don't have a flush budget. We're pretty tight.
Senator, any final thoughts you'd like to say?
Well, we're working hard here. We take input from our constituents, from the stakeholders everywhere, from the sheriffs and the chief of police to the defense attorneys and from victim advocacy groups. We get input from a lot of places, and we welcome that input. And we're going to put together the best budget we can, given the circumstances that we're facing.
Senator, thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Getting Minnesotans the mental health care they need before they fall through the cracks and enter the criminal justice system is the main idea behind Senate File 1492, according to the bill's chief author. In Minnesota, a civil commitment is when a person is voluntarily or involuntarily committed to a treatment facility due to mental health concerns. Senate File 1492 builds upon the state's current civil commitment legislation by establishing a civil commitment coordinating division within the Attorney General's office. It would find gaps in Minnesota's current system, see where improvements can be made, and identify successes. It would also serve as a centralized place for people seeking information information about the process. DFL Senator Ron Latz, the bill's chief author, says it was inspired by a story of loss from a constituent, and that unfortunately, since then, he's heard many more like it.
In many ways, they simply fell through gaps in the system.
Supporters testified that the bill would help foster continuous care for patients, keeping them off the street and out of hospital beds and jail cells, while others raised concerns that the bill duplicates current efforts and questioned whether the Attorney General's office is the right place to focus new efforts.
Why do we think the Attorney General's office is going to do any better than the Department of Human Services?
The system isn't working the way it was intended right now. I think it's important to get outside of DHS now, have another place to look at it.
There's no place to put these folks, and I don't know if this is going to fix that problem.
After unanimously passing in the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee, the bipartisan bill was heard by the State and Local Government Committee, where it was amended and once again returned to the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee. Despite the state's looming budget deficit, the Senate's Judiciary and Public Safety Committee is one of 8 committees poised to gain funding over the next 4 years. According to the Senate's budget targets, which were set by the Majority Caucus, the other committees that will receive a budget boost are Higher Education, Housing and Homelessness Prevention, Commerce and Consumer Protection, Jobs and Economic Development, Labor, State and Local Government, and Veterans and Military Affairs. Other committees will have to reconcile budget losses with their priorities. Those committees are Health and Human Services, Energy, Utilities, Environment and Climate, Elections, Transportation and Public Safety, and Taxes. There are 5 Senate committee jurisdictions that will work through funding fluctuations: Agriculture, Broadband and Rural Development, Environment, Climate and Legacy, Debt Service, Education Finance, and Pensions. And finally, there are 2 areas that saw no changes to their funding structures at all, and those are capital projects and other. It might have been a school night, but educators showed up in droves to support pension reform efforts. Due to the volume of visitors, Capitol staff set up line dividers and handed out tickets ahead of the Legislative Commission on Pensions and Retirement Committee meeting. The teachers came to show their support for Senate File 2000, which increases employer contributions to the Teacher Retirement Association pension plan, reduces penalties for early retirement, and enhances cost of living adjustments.
It's no coincidence that as teachers struggle to support their own families, 9 out of 10 schools can't fill open teaching positions.
This is exactly what we do here at the Capitol. Is we ask Minnesotans to come here and say, what do you think?
The bipartisan bill's authors say it's the best way to attract and retain skilled educators, while others questioned its cost.
If I look at the total cost of the bill on a biennial basis, I think is more than $450 million with the amendment. And if we look at the one-time costs of the bill, it's more than $2.2 billion.
We are mindful of the budget, but that doesn't mean that we can't fund our priorities.
After the debate, the bill was laid over. That's all the time we have today. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time.